Spend a week in Holmes County, Ohio, and something about the children there gets under your skin. Not what they're doing, what they're not doing. No child is sitting in a waiting room staring at a phone. No child is negotiating about homework at 9 p.m. No 8-year-old is managing a social calendar. No 11-year-old is refreshing anything. You watch a group of kids come in from chores, sit down at a table, eat what's in front of them, and then go back outside. And there is no ambient tension in the room. None. The kind that most households with children just accept as background noise. Researchers from Ohio State University who have studied Amish mental health patterns in Holmes County have noted consistently lower rates of anxiety disorders across the lifespan compared to the surrounding non-Amish population. And the data suggests this gap opens in childhood, not adulthood. It is not a gradual divergence. It starts early and stays wide. The CDC's most recent National Survey of Children's Health puts diagnosed anxiety disorders in American children at approximately 9.4%. Some estimates, when broader diagnostic criteria are applied, reach 1 in 5. Whatever number you use, the Amish community equivalent is a fraction of it. The gap is not genetic. Amish children who leave the community through the Rumspringa process and integrate into mainstream American life begin showing anxiety trajectories that resemble their non-Amish peers within a generation. The advantage does not travel in the DNA, it travels in the environment. So what is the environment doing? Specifically, what is the environment not allowing? 6 things, and not one of them costs money or requires a parenting philosophy book. Prohibition 1. Children are not allowed to be bored inside. This sounds backwards. It sounds like it would make boredom worse. It doesn't. In a typical American household, a bored child has approximately 40 options within arm's reach that require nothing of them. Streaming services, games, tablets, YouTube, and a parent who is 5 seconds away from suggesting one of them because the whining is starting. The Amish household has a different rule. Unspoken, but consistent. Boredom inside means you go outside. The house is not where unstructured time happens. The yard is. The barn is. The field is. This matters developmentally because of what happens when a child hits boredom and has no passive option to fill it. The brain, after a window of discomfort that typically lasts 7 to 12 minutes, begins to generate its own engagement. This is not a metaphor. It is measurable. A 2018 study in the journal Creativity Research Journal found that children who experienced unstructured time without access to screens or adult-directed activity showed significantly higher scores on divergent thinking tasks within 45 minutes compared to children who moved directly into a structured or screen-based activity. The Amish child who goes outside when bored does not go to a scheduled playtime. They go to a context that requires something of them. Physical problem-solving, weather assessment, interaction with animals, negotiation with other children, invention. The boredom becomes generative because there is no passive exit. The modern household has accidentally eliminated the discomfort that produces this outcome. The most common mistake is treating indoor boredom as a problem to be solved rather than a process to be allowed. Prohibition 2. Children are not allowed to opt out of real work. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a 6-year-old Amish child has a job that matters. Not a chore chart with sticker rewards. A job. Chickens don't get fed if the child doesn't feed them. That consequence is real, immediate, and understood by everyone at the table. Child development researchers use the term authentic contribution to distinguish between tasks designed to teach children responsibility and tasks that actually are the responsibility. The difference is not subtle to a child's nervous system. Dr. Lucia Alcalá at California State University Fullerton has studied what she calls initiative-taking behavior in children from communities where children are expected to contribute to genuine household functioning, across Guatemalan Mayan communities, indigenous Mexican communities, and in observational studies of traditional agrarian households in the United States. Her findings, published in Human Development in 2014, showed that children who engaged in real-stakes household work showed measurably lower cortisol response to novel stressors than children whose task involvement was primarily educational or symbolic. Lower cortisol response to novel stressors. That is the biological signature of a child who has learned, through repeated experience, that their own competence is reliable. Amish children are not shielded from the weight of real tasks because the community understands, without naming the mechanism, that weight builds something. An 8-year-old who has kept animals alive for 2 years trusts their own capability in a way that no amount of praise can produce. The most common mistake when applying this at home: assigning tasks that don't have real consequences if they're forgotten. A chore that gets quietly completed by a parent when the child forgets teaches nothing about competence. It teaches that someone else will handle it. Prohibition 3. Children are not allowed to set the household schedule. This is the one that tends to land hardest. In Amish households, the day is structured by the farm, the seasons, and the community calendar, not by the child's preferences, mood, or negotiation. Meals happen when meals happen. Sleep happens when sleep happens. There is no 45-minute debate about bedtime. There is no asking a 7-year-old what they want for dinner and then making something different when they change their mind. The reason this matters is not about obedience. It is about what developmental psychologists call predictability load. The cognitive and emotional cost to a child of living in an environment whose parameters they cannot confidently model. Dr. Golda Ginsburg at the University of Connecticut, whose research on childhood anxiety has been published in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, has documented across multiple studies that children who cannot predict what their environment will demand of them maintain a chronically elevated vigilance state. The nervous system stays in low-grade alert, not because something bad is happening, but because the child cannot calculate what is coming next. A child who is regularly asked to choose what to eat, when to sleep, how to spend Sunday afternoon, which extracurricular to prioritize, is not being given freedom. They are being handed a cognitive and emotional burden their prefrontal cortex is not yet built to carry efficiently. The Amish child who wakes up knowing exactly what morning looks like, what afternoon requires, and what Sunday means, has a nervous system that can rest between demands. The Amish did not design their schedules around neuroscience, but a century of observational child development research has spent decades arriving at the same conclusion their daily structure already embodied. The most common mistake: confusing a child's expressed preference for autonomy with a child's actual developmental need for it. They are not the same thing. Prohibition 4. Children are not allowed to watch adults avoid difficulty. In Holmes County, children do not watch their parents call the plumber when the pipe leaks. They watch their father fix the pipe, and sometimes they hand him the wrench. They do not watch their mother order dinner when she is exhausted. They watch her cook it, and sometimes they stand next to her and help. This is not about self-sufficiency as a lifestyle value. It is about what a child's nervous system concludes when it watches an adult encounter a hard thing and move through it. The term researchers use is coping modelling. Albert Bandura's foundational work on observational learning, developed at Stanford across 4 decades, established that children acquire their emotional response strategies not primarily from instruction, but from observation. A child who watches an adult name frustration, stay in the difficulty, and resolve it, learns that frustration is temporary and solvable. A child who watches an adult outsource every difficulty or visibly panic at inconvenience learns something entirely different. Amish children grow up in an environment where difficulty is not hidden. A hard lambing season is not shielded from view. A difficult conversation between adults is not conducted in another room. Financial strain is not managed behind a performance of normalcy. Not because Amish parents are careless with their children's exposure, they are not, but because in a traditional household, difficulty is a visible part of life, and children are present for it. What this produces, developmentally, is a realistic model of how hard things work. The child does not arrive at adulthood believing that difficulty is a signal that something has gone wrong. They arrive knowing that difficulty passes, that it is handleable, and that watching someone you trust move through it is how you learn to move through your own. The most common mistake in modern households: managing parental stress in complete invisibility. Children raised in a household where difficulty is never visible do not conclude that life is easy. They conclude that difficulty is something that must be hidden, which is almost the definition of anxiety. Prohibition 5. Children are not allowed to belong only to their parents. This is the one that requires the most translation. In the Amish community, a child is not raised by their parents. A child is raised by a community that includes their parents. The grandmother down the road corrects a child's behavior without asking permission. The neighboring family's father assigns a task without running it past anyone. The church community provides expectations that are not negotiable at home. Developmental psychologists use the phrase village effect, and it is not sentimental. Research out of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, including work by Richard Weisbord on moral development in children, has documented that children who are accountable to multiple trusted adults, not just parents, develop measurably different self-regulation capacity than children whose correction and accountability come exclusively from within the nuclear family. The reason involves stress inoculation. A child who is only ever corrected, guided, and comforted by their own parents has a nervous system calibrated to one relationship. The moment they step outside that relationship, at school, in a social group, in any context where a non-parent adult makes a demand of them, the physiological response is disproportionate because it is unfamiliar. The demand feels larger than it is. A child who has been corrected by 3 different trusted adults by age 5 has a nervous system that treats accountability as normal rather than threatening. The range of relationships that feel safe is broader. The range of environments that feel manageable is broader. Amish children are not anxious in community settings because community settings are where they live. The household is not a protected capsule separate from the community. The community is the household, extended. The most common mistake in modern households is the one that is hardest to solve because it requires other people. Treating the nuclear family as a self-contained unit and then wondering why the child's world feels small. Prohibition 6. Children are not allowed to skip the uncomfortable feelings. The last prohibition is the one that ties all the others together. In Amish households, when a child is upset, the first response is not removal of the discomfort. It is presence with the discomfort. A child who is disappointed does not immediately get a replacement for the disappointing thing. A child who is frustrated does not immediately get help with the frustrating thing. A child who is sad is not immediately redirected towards something that will stop the sadness. This is not indifference. Watch an Amish parent with a distressed child, and you do not see neglect. You see patience. You see proximity without rushing. You see an adult who is comfortable with the child's discomfort in a way that communicates, without words, that the discomfort is survivable. The clinical term is distress tolerance, the capacity to remain in an uncomfortable emotional state without it escalating to dysregulation. Research by Dr. Marsha Linehan, whose dialectical behavior therapy framework is one of the most replicated distress management programs in clinical psychology, is built on the premise that the inability to tolerate distress, not the distress itself, is the mechanism behind most anxiety and mood disorders. Children are not born with distress tolerance. They build it through repeated experience of surviving discomfort while in the presence of a regulated adult. The presence matters. The regulated adult matters. The survival of the discomfort, without having it removed, is what produces the capacity. The Amish child who has cried, stayed in the crying, and come out the other side, has learned something that no amount of comfort provides, that the feeling ends, and they were okay while it was happening. Modern parenting culture has slowly built a reflex that works in the opposite direction. The faster the discomfort is removed, the better the parenting. It feels right. It feels like love. What it accidentally produces is a child who never builds evidence that they can outlast a hard feeling, because they never have to. The most common mistake is the one that feels most like kindness, solving the feeling before the child has had 90 seconds to discover they could handle it themselves. None of these prohibitions are policies. No Amish parent is reading a framework document. These are conditions that emerged from a community structure that, by necessity, shaped what childhood looks like, and what it produces. The anxiety rates are not a coincidence. They are the output of an environment that consistently delivers 6 things that childhood development appears to require, and that the modern household has, piece by piece, removed. You do not have to move to Holmes County. You cannot replicate the village. But you can pick one of these 6 and stay with it for 30 days. Let a bored child stay bored inside until they go outside. Give a task that matters and do not silently complete it for them when they forget. Stop negotiating what dinner is. Do something difficult in front of your child without performing calm you don't feel. One of these, done consistently, will produce something you can see. Pick the one that stings a little to read. That one is usually the right place to start. If you found something in this worth thinking about, the comment section is a good place to put it, particularly if something here challenged an assumption you didn't know you were carrying. I read them.